Welcome to the newest show from the IWW Iceland. There are a lot of things going on at the moment, and they're all confusing and very complex, and there is not a lot of information available in English. So we decided to make a new show called Let Me Iceplain This. Where I look at one topic more in detail. And the topic that we are going to start with is Icelandair. A saga, I will need some tea for it, a saga involving an airline, a trade union, the Icelandic Confederation of Labour, the government, yet another trade union, shareholders, and pension funds. And it all starts in March, when Icelandair was very strongly hit by the travel restrictions. Now, additionally to all the government assistance that was available to companies during that time, the 25% in unemployment assistance, the government-sponsored layoffs where the government would take over the wages of laid-off workers during the notice period. Icelandair also received 2 loans. One in March and one in May. The one in March was for 100 million kroners, and a similar loan was given to them in May. The loans were there to cover the losses during the restrictions. There was, as far as I know, no conditions given to the loan. So no conditions given to preserve jobs, for example. So despite all of the assistance that they got, they still laid off 95% of the workforce in April. While all of this was going on, there was a discussion going on whether or not Icelandair should be nationalized. Both the government and Icelandair very much rejected this idea, and both said that they would prefer market solutions to nationalization. And it takes some balls to say you prefer market solutions after receiving a lot of government assistance, but this was the official statement that market solutions to Icelandair's financial trouble were preferred. Now, while all of this was going on, Icelandair was negotiating new collective agreements, both with the pilots and with the flight attendants. The pilots, they signed a collective agreement in May, and their union will kind of be important later. So for now, they signed the agreement, they voted yes on the agreement. This dispute was basically over in May. But the flight attendant union, which is the FFI, which has this logo, and just as an aside, this is a very pretty logo. This I really think like having the Arctic tern as your bird on the logo is just a really good choice. Well, so the negotiations with the flight attendants union weren't going well. And one of the main reasons why these negotiations wasn't going well, was because the offer, I don't know if you can call it an offer from Icelandair, was that flight attendants would work 5 hours longer each month for the same wage. So a shareholder meeting was looming on the 22nd of May. There was no sign of any kind of agreement being reached between the FFI and Icelandair. And thus Icelandair had a very, very creative idea. And they thought, what if we just make up a new union? And then we just negotiate a deal with this new union, and then we can just tell the flight attendants, well, this is a union we have a deal with. If you want to work for us, you have to be in this union. This is very much a classic case of union busting. It is also legally in a very grey zone, to put it kindly. And ISE at this point was getting involved because they took the threat of union busting very seriously. Now ISE, the Icelandic Confederation of Labour, is an umbrella organization of unions in Iceland, and the FFE, the flight attendant union, is part of this umbrella organization. So at this point they made a statement, and this statement was that the pension funds are obligated to only invest in companies which observe Icelandic labor law. Now, you might be really confused, like, why pension funds? Like, how do the pension funds go in there? And this is because the pension funds are partially also run by unions. The pension funds in Iceland are investment funds. So you give the pension funds your money, they invest it in company, in shares, and then hopefully this will increase the money and you will get a nice pension out of it when you're old. And the unions run it together with the employers. Like the employer union and the unions run it together. There's usually a representative from each being voted into the board of the pension funds. But it means that the unions do have an influence on the pension funds, and this is why RSE could basically make a threat that the unions might consider to pull out of Icelandair. At this point, the unions were the major shareholders of Icelandair. So Icelandair gave up on the idea of creating a new union. They kept on negotiating with FFE. Just put them up there because their logo is so pretty. So they kept on negotiating with FFE, and on the 25th of June, a collective agreement was signed to be voted on. This collective agreement included the longer work hours for the same pay. And because of this, it was rejected in a vote. So when the members voted on the collective agreement, they rejected the collective agreement with a majority of 73%. And the turnout was 85.3%. So the flight attendants very clearly said no to this agreement. At this point, the agreement had failed and negotiations would have to resume, and eventually, if the negotiations completely failed, there might be a strike. In response to the rejection of the collective agreement, Icelandair fired all the flight attendants, which is not legal. So in Icelandic labor law, in peacetime, which is when collective agreements are in place, you are allowed to fire people at will in the private market. There are no restrictions on mass layoffs. You don't have to give a reason why you fire anyone. Basically, firing everyone would be completely legal in peacetime when a collective agreement is in place. However, when a collective agreement is being negotiated, special rules apply, and it is very much illegal to fire workers during that time, especially if you fire them in order to try to pressure them into signing a collective agreement. So there were several reactions to this move by Icelandair. ISE basically immediately said that they're looking to sue Icelandair in front of the labor court. They also mentioned again that the pension funds should maybe review whether or not they invest in Icelandair. FFE, the flight attendants unions, was basically preparing for a strike because they still had their notice period, so they were just threatening to strike in the notice period. And the government was sad. The government basically said that it would be really bad if it would come to some kind of labor conflict over this. So basically they said, like, please no suing of Icelandair, please no strike, we have to find a solution here. So while FFE was threatening to strike, the pilots who had made a collective agreement with Icelandair in May, they were preparing to take over the duties of the flight attendants, not only until after when the flight attendants were laid off, but also in case the flight attendants go on strike, which is scabbing, which is also not legal. However, their union was supporting Iceland's air decision to making the pilots scab. The union of the Félag Íslenskra Atvinnuflugmanna, the FIA, they basically gave the blessing to the pilots to scab. They are run by a person who used to sit in parliament for Miðflokkurinn. They are not part of RSE, they are not part of the Confederation of Labour, which is why the Confederation of Labour couldn't really call them back on this. And the flight attendants were not very happy that their colleagues would screw them over like this. And I assume that the working atmosphere in planes is very awkward now. But yes, this was a very this was just a move that a yellow union would do, that a union run by employers would do, basically. This is I'm really trying to find nice ways to just say this was not okay, and this was also, like, it basically should get your whole being a union revoked, because you just don't scab. Not as a union. It undermines, like, everyone's right on the labor market. It's also illegal. I mean, strike breaking is illegal. So there were basically two illegal moves being pulled by Icelandair there. So first they, like, fire everyone for not signing an agreement, which is already illegal. And then when a strike is being threatened, they're actively training people to scab and are basically going to say, yeah, we're going to scab. We're going to break the strike. So during all of this, because the government was feeling bad about there maybe being a labor conflict, they got involved in the negotiations, basically made everyone, Icelandair, FFI, sit down. And on July the 20th, that is actually only 3 days later, there's a lot of things that happened in 3 days with, like, everyone saying things. So 3 days later, after all of this, after everyone being fired, after strikes being threatened, after RSE like threatening to sue, after the pilot saying we're going to totally scab here. So this all happened in 3 days. On the July the 20th, a new agreement was signed. The new agreement did not differ from the old agreement. It was just like the old agreement with glasses and a fake nose, hoping that nobody would recognize it the same. So a new agreement was signed, and because the new agreement was signed, all the firings were rescinded. 1 week later, on July the 27th, the flight attendants voted yes on the new agreement with a majority of 83%. And yes, the new agreement had in it that the flight attendants would work 5 hours more for the same pay. So basically, Icelandair had effectively used firings during negotiations for a collective agreement to strong arm the workers to agree to worse working conditions than they had before. All of this it's just not legal. RSE was still threatening to sue over all of it. But, however, peace on the labor market was achieved. A new agreement was in place. As a reward, 1 month later, Icelandair got a state-guaranteed loan of 16.5 billion kronas. At this point, the economic analysis of Icelandair was pretty much that they will not be turning a profit until earliest 2022. And they were still rejecting the idea of being nationalized, and they were still looking for market solutions. And the market solutions they finally found it beginning September. The market. Oh, I need some tea. So the market solutions I found was to dilute the existing shares and create new shares and auction these shares off in order to basically get more funds into the company. There was a discussion whether the pension funds should participate in this auction. The arguments against it was, well, Icelandair had very clearly broken labor law. They were maybe being sued by RSE. It would be immoral and undermining the interests of the workers for the pension funds, who again are partly run by unions, to invest in Icelandair under these conditions. The argument for the pension funds to participate in the auction is, well, for one, it is, or was, I mean the auction is over, a good investment opportunity because you basically get cheap shares in a company that is expected to, in the long run, to make profit. I mean, especially if it is constantly being bailed out by the government, it basically, at this point, can Icelandair even fail? Because the government will just keep giving it money until the tourists can come back, and then Icelandair will turn a profit again. So the cheap shares was like, and it kind of, depending how you look at it, being a good investment opportunity was like one of the reasons why, arguments why the pension funds should participate in the auction. The other argument is basically that with the pension funds having the majority of shares of Icelandair, it is kind of in public hands. It basically means there's like a little bit of control by the public over the company. I mean, not. So the idea is that it is really good for Iceland to have an airline that has a vested interest in serving Icelandic needs, especially considering Iceland is an island. Basically having an airline that will always offer flights from and to Iceland, no matter how little profit they might get from it, because the major shareholders are Icelandic pension funds. So basically the whole idea of independence, sjálfstæði, which is always a very strong argument in Iceland. So very conveniently, and I need more tea. Actually, I would kind of have some alcohol. Kind of would need something stronger for the next part, because the next part is frustrating. So very conveniently, the day before the auction, RSI, FFI, the Union of Flight Attendants, and Icelandair released a joint statement. This statement basically said that Icelandair admitted that they have broken etiquette when they fired all the flight attendants, and they are really, really, really sorry. And RSE said that this statement is good enough for them, and thus Icelandair did not have to face any consequences for breaking Icelandic labor law. Many pension funds participated in the auction. Gildi participated, LSR participated. The pension fund who did not participate was a pension fund from Air Life. But I think most pension funds participated. The actual list of who participated in the auction hasn't been published yet, so all we know are the ones who basically said they participated or who had it on their website, who had been in the news. I kind of wish I were a company at this point. It would be kind of nice to be able to break the law and then just to say, oh, this was kind of shitty of me, I'm so sorry, and not face any consequences. I mean, Icelandair also got everything they got out from breaking the law. The agreement that was really bad for the flight attendants. I mean, they still got this agreement. They didn't have to renegotiate the agreement. They didn't have to pay any fines. Fines for breaking labor law. Yeah, that would be a nice thing to exist. Basically, they got away with just saying, yeah, we kind of did something shitty. That was bad of us. We're sorry. And this really matters. This really matters for any future negotiation on the Icelandic labor market. My notes are done. Now I'm just commenting. This really matters for any future negotiation on the labor market, because now companies know they can use firings as a threat. And we foreigners, we know that companies have already used firings as a threat in other cases. I mean, we know in certain industries, hotels, restaurants, bars, cafes, that if a representative is chosen, that this person will get fired, we know that if we ask too many questions and if we know our rights too much, that we are in danger of being fired. So the idea that you undermine people's rights and people's negotiated rights by threatening firings has been a practice on the Icelandic labor market for a long time, but mainly concerning foreigners. They're just kind of escalating it now. In the strikes in 2019, they didn't fire people during the strike, but they were using the constant threat of mass firings after the strike to undermine it, which was, well, not illegal. So the unions kind of let it happen during that time too. And now they kind of just escalated. Like, this is, I think, the first time firings being used like as a threat like this was used against Icelandic people, because most of the flight attendants are Icelandic, and it was used the first time during negotiations, but it kind of has been slowly escalating over the past 2 years. And we say now, being the precedent that a company can do it without having to face consequences, it is really worrying. It basically means that we lost a lot of our ability to negotiate during this whole deal. And this now comes into play with what will be our next show, because our next show will be about the live collective agreement, which just had been up for review and is at the moment holding. But yeah, this will probably be like a few shows, because this is kind of a very complicated issue. Like, what the agreement even is, what it promised, did it keep what it promised, why were the unions... I mean, one of the reasons now the unions were basically so strongly in favor of not cancelling this live collective agreement now, for example, was because they are in a really weak position to negotiate, and the whole Icelandair thing made their position to negotiate even weaker. And the fact that RSE let this happen, it's a complete act of self-sabotage on part of the labor movement, and the consequences of which we will see this more now. This will not be the first time everyone gets fired. This will just be the new Icelandic reality now, because once you can do it, as a company, once you know you can do it, why not use it? If this is suddenly a tool in your toolbox, why not use it? So this is my very depressing end of this episode. I hope you all liked it. And yeah, feel free to comment below. Feel free to send us a message if you have an email. If you have any questions. I want to thank Friggi for helping me with this and for doing all the Icelandic Googling. That would have taken me a really long time. I want to thank Raffi for being my earlander and discussing ideas and what we should focus on this episode. And yes, if you have any questions or you want to join or anything, let us know.